Hi, this is Adam Stopsky from Briefly, and we are here with the next episode in our legal information video series with Inland County's Legal Services. I'm here with Darrell Moore, who's a very experienced housing attorney, and today we're going to talk about the kind of complex and interesting topic of subsidized housing and evictions from subsidized housing. But before we do that, just to make sure that the viewers so they know they're in the right place, can you explain to us, Darrell, just what is subsidized housing? What does that even mean broadly?
Well, great question. Thank you, Adam. The subsidized housing is a general term used by our society to provide opportunities and support for working families living at or below the poverty line, basic, decent housing. So it's a government-sponsored program.
So this is like if you live in a government-built public housing project, or maybe you have a voucher from the government to pay for your rent. It's things like that, right?
Correct. Commonly called Section 8 or project-based housing. There's different varieties, there's different kinds, but those are the two of the bigger ones.
Okay. So I want to ask you about sort of how this kind of housing differs from just if you go rent a house from a private landlord. I want to start with rent increases, which I know is a real concern. Often private landlords can just kind of raise the rent however much they want. How does that work in subsidized housing? Is it any different?
It can be substantially different. When you contrast your basic landlord-tenant relationship in the private sector, where there is no government housing, you have a one-on-one relationship with your tenant and your landlord. Very different when we're talking about subsidized housing. You actually have three relationships at work. You have the relationship between the tenant and the landlord, the relationship between the tenant and the governmental entity providing the housing benefit, and then you have the relationship between the landlord and the housing benefit provider as well. And so when we talk about rent increases, it's done pursuant to a pretty strict regimen of guidelines, rules, and regulations. They're very complex. We wouldn't spend a lot of time going over any particular rent increase, but it's a process to get that approval in place. And typically you're going to get a significant amount of times of a rental increase when it does come to pass, typically 90 days.
Got it. So in other words, just kind of to summarize, it's actually kind of harder to raise rent in subsidized housing than it is for a private landlord.
Well, everything is a little bit more challenging for landlords and tenants when we're involving the government in subsidized housing. It's across the board a more complex relationship.
So now let's talk about eviction. How does eviction differ? I know this is probably a pretty complicated question. There's lots of different kinds of eviction, but what are some of the ways in which eviction differs in the subsidized housing context? Can the I guess the landlord, the owner of or the manager of the subsidized housing just kind of evict someone or not renew their lease like they would in the context of private housing?
No, it's a double-edged sword, right? So the landlords have a little greater degree of regulatory requirements that they must satisfy, along with the tenants. That is in part giving the tenants some protection, if you will, against eviction, but it also requires the tenants to fully participate and engage the regulatory process. So we find that in subsidized housing, evictions tend to be more complex. The notice requirements are more complex, and there's an administrative process that could be involved as well.
So can you talk about the concept of good cause and good cause eviction in subsidized housing, what that means?
So again, when we're a tenant living with subsidized housing, generally speaking, you're going to have a relationship between yourself and the housing provider, the landlord, and they're going to have rules and regulations. You're almost always going to have a written lease, and you're going to have rules and regulations that you must satisfy. Your conduct must satisfy. So when we're talking about good cause, Generally speaking, what we're talking about is a situation where the landlord believes that you, the tenant, haven't done everything you're supposed to do, whether that is to conform your conduct to the rules that are been provided to you, or whether you have been behind in your rent, that's the big one, or any other rule that has been made clear to you, but your conduct allegedly is falling short of what is required.
So it could be things like making a lot of noise, or having a dog when you're not supposed to have a dog, or having a roommate when you're not supposed to have a roommate. Is it things of that nature?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest in the real world on the day to day, the biggest thing that we see is that, hey, you're getting a housing benefit if we're talking to you in this context, and you've gotten that housing benefit based on an eligibility criteria. And that eligibility criteria generally speaks to your amount of income. And that's usually the household income. So the number one thing that we see, tenants fail to properly account for their income. They fail to report changes in their income. They fail to report someone has come into the household and they have income, or they fail to report someone came into the household, they didn't have any income, but they were not permitted on the lease. Those are typically the biggest issues we see.
So can you be evicted without that good cause, either from kind of public housing, project-based housing, or Section 8?
The old idea that you can simply be evicted without cause under any circumstance is really kind of going the way of the dinosaur. Almost always, we're going to be able to find some protection for the tenant. And so there's always going to, generally speaking, be um, a requirement that there's a reason why your tenancy has to be terminated. There are going to be some exceptions that go forward. If you're living in a single family house and the owner of the property wants to come back to the house, there's still going to be ways for that owner to be able to do that. But when we're talking about subsidized housing, usually we're talking about a larger apartment complex typically, and there's going to be a lot of protection there for you. There's going to have to be, generally speaking, good cause to terminate that relationship.
Okay, great. Well, that's good news for public housing tenants.
It's wonderful news. Absolutely.
What so let's say I'm living in subsidized housing of some sort, and I do get an eviction notice. What should I do when I get that notice saying I'm being evicted?
Okay, so really kind of exciting, actually, just brand new out the gate, just starting January 1st, 2025. So we're just getting started with this. Are some new requirements for subsidized housing, and one of those requirements is that the landlord must now give you 30 days notice that you're behind in your rent, or you have failed to comply in some way with the rules. I can't emphasize enough to you how significant it is that you do not waste your 30 days. If you do get such a notice, you have our number, you have our website, you contact us immediately. That purpose of that 30 days is to find the specific purpose of this 30 days. And the reason they're increasing these rules is so that you as a tenant can find a solution so that you can avoid the eviction. Do not let that 30 days pass without taking action. And the easiest thing to do is contact us here at Inland County's Legal Services if you're in the Inland Empire, Riverside and San Bernardino County. And when I say don't let 30 days pass, don't let 20 days pass. Don't let 10 days pass. The 30 days goes by in a hurry. You get that notice, you call that day or within the next business day. And you keep calling us until you get an appointment.
Okay, great. Um, so can you just give us kind of a summary of if you are a public housing tenant and you get that eviction notice, and yes, hopefully you have a lawyer from Inland Counties or another lawyer. What are your rights, just in kind of broad strokes? What are your rights as a tenant in public housing in eviction proceedings?
So there's two things here that we really want to make sure we keep in focus. We talked at the beginning about how this is really a three-part relationship. There's the relationship between you and the landlord, and maybe even more significantly, there's a relationship between you and the governmental entity providing the benefit to you. This is not an adversarial relationship between you, the tenant, and the governmental entity providing the benefit to you. I point this out to you because you should be in robust communication with your caseworker so that you're never catching them by surprise. If you have questions about anything that's happening within your tenancy, start with your caseworker. Or if you need to, contact us. We'll be happy to talk with you. But I point this out because there may be administrative remedies that are available to you that will help you iron out any difficulties you have with the landlord prior to getting the state court involved. This is a resource available to you that you just can't simply allow to fall by the wayside. And the reason I focus on this so much is that Adam asked earlier if we have how is eviction different from public housing in public housing cases? Well, it's substantially different with respect to the possible outcome. If you lose an eviction case in state court, this will compromise and probably prevent you from ever qualifying again from getting that federal assistance in housing. So losing an eviction case in state court when you're on a subsidized housing has much greater impact on that tenant than a typical state court, no subsidized housing tenancy. This is why it's absolutely so critically important that if you know you're having challenges with your rent, one of the things that's coming out with the new regulations going into effect is a greater emphasis on working with tenants who are having a challenge. There are opportunities for landlords to actually ask for a payment from the government if they missed the rent payment. And there may be an opportunity, maybe, for you to have your rent reduced if your income has been reduced. The question is, if you're falling behind in your rent, why? Why are you falling behind in your rent? What's going on? And is there an administrative remedy for that? Maybe, maybe not. But don't catch your caseworker. Don't let your caseworker get caught by surprise that there's a problem. You should be reaching out to the caseworker first. Or us, one or the other.
Great. Thank you, Darrell. So what is the best way to get you guys? What's the best way to reach you?
So Inland Empire, right? We have, I think, 4 million people living close to or at the poverty line. It's a tragedy. And we're doing a great job here at Inland Counties, but we have 150 on staff. So you're going to get a phone number from us and you're going to get a website from us. And I would just implore you, please be patient. If you don't get a hold of us on day one, don't give up. I know it's challenging to get through the system, but we have an internet. Go on the internet. We have clinics. You can ideally would have an appointment to go to the clinic, but if you can't get through to anybody, just show up at the clinic and then someone in person will help you. Our offices, most of our workers are working remote. We do have some people in the office. You can try physically stopping by. I don't necessarily encourage that because the chances are you're not going to find anybody. But keep on the phones, and there is a portal on the website that you can utilize. So be patient, but don't give up. Get a hold of us because we're looking forward to talking to you.
Great. All right, Darrell. Thanks so much.
Thank you.